I knew he was big, they told me on the phone, they laughed, even, he's a mountain with hooves, but harmless if you don't spook him. But no one warned me how small I'd feel standing in front of him. Atlas. That was his name. And I swear, I'd never seen a creature so enormous, so still, and yet so haunted. The first time I laid eyes on him, I forgot how to breathe. He stood alone in the far paddock, near the tree line, half-shaded by the rustling limbs of a towering elm. His body was caked in mud, one ear flicking against the buzzing flies, the other turned to me like a question, "Who are you, and why are you here?" I didn't have an answer. All I had was a backpack full of clothes, a bruised heart, and a job I wasn't sure I could do. It had started 2 weeks earlier, in a city apartment that no longer felt like mine. I'd lost my job at the advertising firm in a round of corporate downsizing, and the rent clock ticked louder with every passing day. My roommate offered pity and playlists. My parents offered, "Maybe you should come home." But I needed something else, somewhere else. That's when I found the listing, caretaker needed, rural horse farm. Temporary position. Room and board provided. No experience required, just grit and heart. I laughed when I read it. Then I reread it. Again. And I applied. 3 days later, I was on a bus headed nowhere with a suitcase and a mess of unspoken fear rattling in my chest. "You'll mostly be mucking stalls and feeding the goats," the farm owner, Carla, had said when I arrived. "But we've got one horse, he's the real handful. You're not expected to handle him. Not unless you want to." I didn't. I really didn't. Until I saw him. And everything in me stopped. His head alone looked like it belonged to a creature from mythology, massive, square, and noble, with deep-set eyes that seemed carved from something older than time. His legs were like tree trunks, his hooves the size of dinner plates. His chest? Broader than my shoulders could ever dream of being. I'd seen horses before. Trail horses, show horses, ponies at birthday parties. But Atlas? Atlas was a draft horse. A Percheron, Carla said. Nearly 19 hands tall. He was rescued from a logging operation up north, she explained as we watched him from the fence line. Worked too hard, treated too rough. He's got scars, inside and out. I nodded, numb. He doesn't trust anyone anymore, she added. But I keep him here because this is the only place quiet enough for him to breathe. I kept my eyes on him. Does he ever let people near him? Not since he kicked a trainer through the barn wall last spring. I blinked. Was the trainer okay? He's teaching yoga now, she said with a shrug. Probably for the best. I swallowed. He's really big. Carla gave me a sideways glance. You don't say. The days that followed were filled with muck and hay and goats with more personality than most people I'd met in the city. But every evening, like clockwork, I'd walk past Atlas's paddock. And every evening, he would be there, always in the same spot, watching from the shadows like he didn't trust the light. I didn't try to talk to him. I didn't call his name. But I started to stop longer. First for a minute. Then 5. Then 10. Sometimes I'd sit on the fence post and read aloud from my old journal, just to fill the air with something soft. I told myself I was just clearing my head, but the truth was, I wanted him to get used to my voice. To know that I wasn't here to demand anything from him. That I knew what it meant to be scared of being touched. One afternoon, while carrying feed buckets to the barn, I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy hoofs behind me. I froze. I didn't turn around. Didn't breathe. Slow. Deep. Thunderous steps. And then? Silence. When I finally looked, he was standing 10 feet away. Atlas. Not charging. Not snorting. Just looking. Like he was as surprised as I was. I didn't move. I barely blinked. My heart slammed against my ribs, equal parts terror and awe. He was so close. So big. Too big. I couldn't handle it. Not emotionally. Not physically. My knees started to tremble, and instinct screamed, step back. Step away. Too much. Too fast. But another part of me, quieter, steadier, held me in place. He lowered his head just slightly, eyes locked on mine. Then, with a soft huff, he turned and walked away. I barely slept that night. Not because I was scared. But because I couldn't stop thinking about it. The moment. The eye contact. The choice he made, to come close, then to walk away. He was testing me. And I hadn't failed. But I hadn't passed either. The next day, I grabbed an old chair from the barn and dragged it into the grass near his paddock. I didn't bring food. Didn't speak. Just sat. It took an hour for him to look up. 2 more before he took a single step in my direction. But he did. That was the beginning. Later, Carla walked past me carrying a bag of feed. You know you don't have to sit there. I shrugged. I know. She smiled. He's too big for most people. I looked out toward him, still distant, still massive, still watching. Maybe that's the point. That evening, I stood at the edge of the paddock as the sky blushed pink behind the trees. Atlas approached the fence slowly. I held my breath. And this time, he didn't stop 10 feet away. He stopped right in front of me. My heart beat so loud it drowned out the wind. I didn't reach out. Didn't even lift my hand. I just stood there. Still. Open. He lowered his head again. Paused. And then, gently, he exhaled against my forearm. Warm. Quiet. Real. My eyes filled with tears before I could stop them. Because that touch. That one, cautious breath against my skin. Was bigger than anything I'd expected. And somehow. Exactly what I needed. It's strange how silence can begin to feel like conversation. After that first moment at the fence. His breath brushing my arm, the space between us no longer just absence but attention, something shifted. Not in him. In me. I began to notice the way he moved. The rhythm of his steps. The tilt of his head. The way he chose his shadows and his sunlight. He was still wary. Distant. But no longer unreachable. And every morning, I found myself walking to his paddock before I did anything else. Before breakfast. Before coffee. Before my fear could catch up. I didn't call his name. I didn't bring treats. I just showed up. And waited. The first week, he never crossed the halfway mark. He'd lift his head when he saw me. Watch me quietly. Sometimes he'd shift his weight, flick an ear, or blow air through his nose, but that was it. And that was enough. Because I knew what it felt like to be watched and left alone. How rare that was. How necessary. On the 8th morning, something new happened. I was sitting cross-legged on the grass outside the paddock, notebook open, pretending to write but mostly just thinking. Atlas stood under his favorite tree, half in shadow, tail flicking absently. Then, without any warning, he took 3 steps forward. Not fast. Not hesitant. Just, deliberate. My pulse quickened. I kept my eyes down, resisting the urge to look straight at him. He stopped 10 feet away. I glanced up. He blinked. And in that one blink, I felt everything shift again. He was choosing to come closer. Not out of curiosity. Not out of hunger. Out of recognition. He was starting to see me. Carla noticed, of course. She always did. That horse doesn't move unless he means to, she said one afternoon as I helped her stack hay bales. You're doing something right. I'm doing nothing, I said honestly. Exactly, she replied, with a smile in her eyes. One evening, after the goats were fed and the barn chores were done, I went back to the paddock and sat on the fence rail with my feet dangling over the side. Atlas was near the far fence, grazing peacefully. His back caught the last light of the setting sun, turning the gray in his coat silver. "Hey," I said quietly. It wasn't a command. Just a greeting. He lifted his head. Our eyes met. And then, step by step, he walked toward me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. He stopped just beneath me. I could have reached out and touched his back, but I didn't. Instead, I just said, "Thanks." It wasn't for the approach. It was for the space. The patience. The quiet way he taught me how to just be again. That night, I wrote in my journal by flashlight, lying on the creaky cot in the caretaker's room. He doesn't want anything from me. No praise. No performance. Just presence. That's the first step, I think. Not being brave. Not being strong. Just staying long enough for something to change. The next morning, I brought a brush with me. Not to use. Just to carry. To see how he'd react. He saw it right away, of course. His ears twitched. He stepped backward. Not far, but enough to tell me, not yet. So I set it on the ground near the fence post and backed away. That day, he didn't come close. But the next day, he sniffed it. And the day after that, he nudged it with his nose, then looked at me like, "I know what this is." Still, I didn't use it. Not until he asked. That evening, the wind picked up. Storm clouds gathered low and heavy over the hills. Carla was out picking up supplies, and I hurried to secure the barn, cover the hay, and double-check the latches. Then I went to check on Atlas. I found him pacing near the gate, anxious, agitated, his breath sharp and quick. He didn't like storms. Neither did I. Without thinking, I opened the gate and stepped inside. It was the first time I'd entered the paddock. The first time I felt the weight of his size up close, not from behind a fence, but in the same space. He froze. I froze. Wind howled through the trees. "Hey," I whispered, not daring to move. "It's okay." He turned his head slightly, eye on me. I could feel the tension in the air like static. "I'm just here," I said. "You don't have to do anything." He shifted his weight. One hoof scraped the dirt. The sky rumbled overhead. And then, he walked toward me. Slowly. Every instinct screamed too close, too big, too dangerous. But I stayed. And when he reached me, he didn't stop. He brushed his massive shoulder against my arm, just slightly. Then turned his head and let out a long, steady breath. We stood like that until the rain began. I didn't run. Neither did he. That night, Carla returned to find me sitting in the barn doorway, soaked to the bone but smiling like I'd seen the stars fall. "He let you in," she said. I nodded. "It's more than most people get." "I didn't do anything," I said again. Carla chuckled. "Exactly." The next morning, I brought the brush again. This time, I didn't leave it on the ground. I held it loosely in one hand as I stood near the gate. Atlas walked right up to me. He sniffed the brush. Then lowered his head. An invitation. A request. A yes. Hands shaking, I raised the brush and moved slowly toward his neck. He didn't flinch. The bristles touched his coat. And he sighed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just, deeply. Like he'd been holding his breath for a long time. And now, finally, he could let it go. I brushed him for 10 minutes that morning. Maybe 15. It was the slowest, quietest grooming session I'd ever seen. I didn't dare move quickly. I didn't speak. I barely breathed. But every stroke of that brush felt like a miracle. Like a handshake between two souls that had been afraid to touch the world for far too long. When I finished, I stepped back and let the brush fall to my side. Atlas lifted his head and looked at me. And for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Recognition. Not just of my face, but of who I was beneath it. Someone who wasn't trying to handle him. Someone who wasn't afraid to admit they couldn't. Someone who stayed anyway. The first scream startled me more than the sound of breaking wood. It came sharp and raw from Atlas's throat, wild, primal, nothing like the quiet sighs he gave when I brushed him or the soft snorts he offered when I came near. This sound was different. A warning. A memory. Then came the crash. By the time I sprinted from the barn, the paddock gate was wide open, and Atlas was gone. The broken fence post leaned like a snapped bone. One of the rails had splintered clean through. Dust still hung in the air like smoke. I followed the fresh hoofprints, already deep and sharp in the soft ground, toward the grove behind the pasture. My heart pounded, not just from running, but from fear, for him. Something had spooked him badly. And whatever it was, it had torn through the fragile trust we'd spent weeks building. I found him near the creek bed, pacing in tight, frantic circles, sides heaving, eyes wild with a fear that didn't seem to belong to this moment alone. It was older. Deeper. He looked like a horse who had run from worse things than broken fences. I stood just beyond the brush, heart thudding. I didn't call his name. I didn't rush in. Instead, I sat. Slowly. Purposefully. Like I had when I first started coming to the paddock. Letting the silence speak for me. He didn't notice me at first. Or maybe he did and didn't care. His body language was tight, untrusting. He reared once, hooves pawing the air, then slammed back down into the dirt. I winced, watching. He was too big for this kind of panic. Too powerful. Too fragile, somehow. For a long time, I didn't move. I just breathed. In and out. In and out. Matching the rhythm I hoped he would find. Eventually, Atlas stopped circling. His nostrils flared. His ears twitched. He turned his head slightly in my direction, but didn't look straight at me. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he took a single step toward me. Then another. I stayed still, hands in my lap, palms up. Open. Unafraid, even though part of me still trembled. When he came close enough to see my face clearly, he stopped. His body shook with aftershock, like thunder left over from a storm already past. I'm not going to touch you, I whispered. You don't have to let me. His eyes locked onto mine. And in that moment, I realized. He had let himself be seen. Not by the people who had driven him or hit him or forced him to carry what he wasn't ready for. But by me. Someone who had collapsed under her own weight and had no plans to make him carry hers. Atlas lowered his head. Not as a sign of defeat. But as a sign of surrender. And I exhaled. Carla showed up half an hour later with a lead rope and a look of concern. He's never broken out like that before. What happened? I don't know, I said honestly. Something must have triggered him. She looked around. Coyotes, maybe. Or thunder rolling in. I shrugged. Or maybe he just remembered something. Carla nodded. Trauma's funny that way. It doesn't follow rules. I glanced at Atlas, now grazing calmly nearby. Yeah. People aren't much different. We repaired the fence that afternoon together, working mostly in silence. Atlas watched us from the shade of the trees but didn't wander far. When Carla finished hammering in the final rail, she looked at me. You were with him, weren't you? I nodded. And he didn't hurt you? No. Did you try to halter him? Nope. She studied me. And you just sat? Pretty much. She laughed, but it wasn't mocking. It was almost in awe. You're not a horse trainer, are you? No. But he let you near him? He didn't let me in. Not really. But he didn't push me away. That's more than most. That night, I wrote in my journal until my hand cramped. He panicked today. But I didn't. Not this time. I used to think being brave meant taking control. Now I think it means letting go of control, especially when it scares you. He let me see him afraid. And maybe that's the beginning of real trust. The next day, I brought an apple to the paddock. Not to bribe him. To offer. I held it in an open palm, unsure if he'd take it. He didn't at first. He sniffed it. Eyed me carefully. Flicked his ears like he was weighing the risk. Then, slowly, gently, he took it from my hand. His lips brushed my skin, warm and damp. I didn't flinch. Neither did he. We walked together after that. Side by side, along the fence line. I didn't touch him. Didn't guide him. I simply walked, and he followed. Or maybe we were walking toward something together. A place where no one had to be in charge. Where being together didn't mean being handled. It meant being understood. But healing isn't a straight path. There were days when Atlas pulled away again. Days when I tried to halter him and he balked, turned, backed up fast and wild-eyed. The first time, I almost cried. The second time, I almost yelled. The third time, I just stepped back and said, "It's okay." Because I'd learned something important. His fear wasn't rejection. It was protection. And I couldn't ask him to lower his defenses unless I was willing to lower mine. One chilly morning, I found him standing at the gate waiting. Not pacing. Not nervous. Just waiting. I opened the latch slowly and stepped inside. He didn't move. I reached out and touched his shoulder, just lightly. He exhaled and leaned into me. Not hard. Just enough. Like a weight settling into balance. And I whispered, "We're figuring this out, aren't we?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Later that day, Carla handed me a worn leather halter. "You think he'll let you try?" she asked. I held it in my hands, unsure. "I can try. But not today." She smiled. "You're learning his rhythm." "I think I'm learning mine too." That night, I didn't write in my journal. I sat on the porch and watched the moon rise over the trees, listening to the quiet sounds of the farm breathing in its sleep. And I realized. The thing that had once felt too big. Too overwhelming. Too much for me to handle. Was now something I no longer feared. Not because it had gotten smaller. But because I had stopped trying to carry it alone. The call came just after sunrise. I was feeding the goats when Carla waved her phone in the air, her face creased with concern. "The vet's coming this morning," she said. "He's got an opening for Atlas's annual checkup, and if we don't take it, we'll wait months." I stopped mid-step, grain bucket still in hand. "You mean, today?" She nodded. "In 2 hours." My stomach sank. I'd been avoiding this moment. Telling myself we weren't ready. That Atlas wasn't ready. That I wasn't the right person for it. Let someone experienced handle him. Someone bigger. Someone stronger. Not me. "He's going to need to be haltered and held," Carla said gently. "I can try, but, well, he's been letting you in. If he'll let anyone, it's you." I didn't answer. I just nodded and turned away, not trusting my voice. Bika. "NT, I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be simple." Then, as I lifted the strap toward his ear, something changed. He flinched. Then stepped back. Then bolted. A blur of muscle and panic, circling the paddock like a storm. "No, no, no," I gasped, stepping back instinctively. Atlas snorted and reared slightly, hoofs pawing the air, eyes wide with fear I couldn't understand. Not just resistance, terror. I froze. The halter dangled uselessly in my hand. This wasn't just about training. This was a flashback. A ghost. Something buried in his body deeper than scars. And I couldn't reach it. I wanted to drop the halter and leave. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream that I wasn't strong enough for this. Because I wasn't. Not in the way people meant it. I can't do it, I told Carla 10 minutes later, my hands shaking. He's too much. Too scared. Too big. She didn't say anything right away. Just handed me a water bottle and waited. Finally, she spoke. You know, I've had him here for 2 years. And in all that time, no one's gotten as close as you have. Not even me. Then why can't I handle him now? Because handling isn't the same as understanding, she said. And right now, he needs both. I looked at her, throat tight. But what if I fail him? Carla smiled, soft and steady. Then you try again. That's what he's been doing for you since day one, hasn't he? I stood at the paddock gate for a long time before going back in. Atlas was on the far side now, under the tree, tail swishing. I didn't bring the halter. Just a bucket of warm water, a towel, and an old carrot. He didn't look at me right away. Didn't move. So I sat. Not close. But close enough for him to see me. I set the carrot in the grass and waited. Minutes passed. The wind moved through the branches. A bird chirped. Then, finally, he stepped forward. One step. Then another. He reached the carrot, sniffed it, then looked at me. I kept my gaze low. I'm sorry, I said. He blinked. I rushed you. I didn't listen. I got scared and tried to cover it up with control. Another step. He was beside me now. I didn't reach for him. I just let him be there. We sat like that for a long time, long enough that I stopped counting. Then I stood, slowly, and turned toward the barn. And he followed. When the vet arrived, I didn't try to hold Atlas still. I stood beside him. Talked to him. Breathed with him. The vet moved calmly, slowly, with no sudden sounds or sharp motions. He examined Atlas from a respectful distance first, then moved closer, checking his eyes, his legs, his mouth. When the time came to administer the vaccine, I expected Atlas to pull away. But he didn't. He flinched, yes. But stayed. And I realized, I hadn't handled him. I had supported him. And that made all the difference. Later, as the vet drove off and Carla walked back to the house, I led Atlas into the paddock with a halter resting gently on his neck, not buckled, just resting. He didn't mind. I removed it after a few steps and let it fall away. Then I turned to him and said, "You did great." He lowered his head, touched his nose to my shoulder. And in that quiet touch, I felt something release in me. The idea that I had to be strong. That I had to lead, control, fix. I didn't. I just had to show up. Even when it felt too big. Even when I thought I couldn't handle it. That night, I sat outside under the stars and wrote only one sentence in my journal. Today, I didn't handle him. But I was there, and that was enough. The saddle looked too clean for a horse like Atlas. It hung there on the rack in the tack room, leather worn smooth in places, but polished, oiled, ready. As if waiting for something. Or someone. I hadn't dared to touch it before. Not because of the leather. Because of what it meant. It wasn't just about riding. It was about trust. About holding someone's weight, and letting them hold yours in return. It had been 3 days since the vet visit. 3 days since Atlas let me stand beside him with the halter on. Since then, something between us had settled. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough. He came to the gate when I called. He let me touch his face without flinching. He leaned into my presence, like it made the world quieter. And I did the same. That morning, Carla met me at the paddock and handed me the saddle blanket. I cleaned it for you, she said casually, though I could hear something careful in her voice. I haven't asked him yet, I replied, holding the blanket like a question. Carla shrugged. Then ask. She walked away, leaving me alone with the wind and the weight in my hands. Atlas stood beneath the same tree he always favored, head lowered, eyes half closed. I took the long way around the fence to reach him. Not out of fear, but out of respect. I let him see the saddle blanket. Let him sniff it. He didn't back away. Didn't snort. Just looked at me with that steady gaze that no longer made me nervous. I draped it gently over his back. He shifted slightly, adjusting, not resisting. That okay? I whispered. A blink. A sigh. I retrieved the saddle next. It was heavier than I expected. Or maybe I was just holding it like something sacred. With care. With intention. When I laid it across his back, Atlas didn't move. He just breathed. And I breathed with him. Carla watched from the fence line as I adjusted the girth, checked the stirrups, ran my hands along his sides one last time. Are you going to get on? She called. I don't know, I called back. But I did. I wanted to. Not to conquer. Not to prove anything. But because I'd stopped running from the parts of me that were afraid. And I wanted to feel that with him. Together. I led Atlas to the mounting block, slowly, steadily. He followed without resistance. My foot hovered over the stirrup for a moment that felt eternal. And then, softly, without drama, I climbed into the saddle. He didn't spook. He didn't bolt. He just stood there, ears flicking toward me like he was waiting. We both were. The first step was like stepping into another life. He moved forward, smooth and slow. One step. Then another. My breath caught in my chest, not from fear, but awe. I was on the back of a horse I once thought I could never touch. And now, we were moving. Together. We circled the paddock once. Twice. Every step felt like a heartbeat. I didn't steer hard. Didn't grip with my legs. I just let myself be there. Trusting him. Trusting me. We stopped near the far gate, and I leaned forward, laying my hand flat against his neck. You carried me, I whispered. Even when I didn't think I could carry myself. The next day, Carla printed out a new sign. She hung it on the barn door without telling me. It read, Welcome to Atlas Sanctuary. For horses too big, and people who thought they weren't enough. That afternoon, a young girl and her mother came to visit. The girl had trouble walking, her right leg was stiff, and she used a brace, but her eyes sparkled when she saw Atlas. He's huge, she breathed, gripping her mother's hand. Carla smiled. Want to meet him? The girl nodded. I led Atlas forward slowly, letting him choose the pace. He paused a few feet from her. Lowered his head. And waited. She reached out, tiny fingers brushing his muzzle. He stayed still. And for the first time, I saw Atlas give something back to someone other than me. Not his trust. Not yet. But a glimpse of his calm. The kind he'd taught me. The kind we now carried together. That night, I lay awake in the loft above the barn, listening to the creak of the rafters and the wind through the trees. I thought about the first time I'd seen him. How I'd frozen at the fence, overwhelmed by his size. By his silence. By the weight of what I thought I couldn't handle. I thought about how many times I almost gave up. How many times I believed I wasn't the right person. Wasn't strong enough. But the truth? I was never meant to handle it alone. The next morning, I saddled Atlas again. We didn't go far. Just a slow ride down the hill and back. But that wasn't the point. The point was, I stayed. I showed up. I carried the fear with me instead of letting it lead. And he carried me. Not because he had to. But because he could. And because, finally, I could hold the weight too. As we reached the edge of the pasture, Carla waved from the porch. She looked proud. But not surprised. You know, she called, a lot of people would have walked away when they realized how much work he'd be. I looked down at Atlas. Then back at her. I almost did, I admitted. But. I smiled, running my hand through his mane. But I stayed. And that's the thing about the weight we carry. Sometimes it really is too big. Too much. Too terrifying. But when someone, something, stands beside us long enough, without pushing or pulling, we begin to believe that we can carry it. Not alone. But together.